Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And with me is Derek Cohen, our Chief Research Officer here at TPPF. I don't know why I blanked on that. All right, Derek, we're in the thick of things. We're about to be out of the emergency session, and then it's things are going to go hog wild after this, I think.
Well, you mentioned, 9 weeks out of 10. Are you tired yet? And I think I can finally confirm that the answer is yes. The hearing yesterday, which we'll get into in more detail, went to 6:30 a.m.
20 hours of hearings.
Yeah, just 20 and a half. Yeah, 20 and a half.
Yeah, don't sleep on that 30.
Actually, the last 30, to credit to the legislators, they were actually there and at the dais, and actually good attendance throughout. To be honest with you, but yeah, just if you see the pace that things are picking up, even folks that don't spend as much time in the building as they once did, myself being the chief one, you just see that people are starting to get I would say session fatigue. Mm-hmm. When people ask well, why is session only 140 days. Can you imagine if it were longer?
Saw some new people, some young bucks, some young policy analysts that were taking the reins now and doing their time, I guess, because all of you have done it before. You've done those long sessions, and when you were policy analysts and policy directors, and now you see some new guys in there taking the reins.
Much like I have last time we had Andrew Brown on the show, and I said that we've adopted a kind of an ethos in leadership. Alan, that's Andrew's problem now. Uh-huh. Similarly, it's George's problem now. Yeah, and George, who joined us last week.
And he was right there front and center for most of the 20 and a half hours.
Yes.
So kudos to him and to all the committee members. We'll get into that more, but kudos to all of them that did that. So, all right, hot take. Start with something a little fun here at the beginning. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, Trump had this, I guess it was a press conference. I don't know, but they lined. He went shopping for a Tesla. I don't know if you saw any of this. They lined up 4 or 5 different Teslas right there
in your office,
in the ellipse, right at the back door of the White House, and he walks out there with Elon Musk, and starts sitting in the cars, and they didn't go on a test drive. The media desperately wanted him to go on a test
computer.
Drive. Yeah, desperately wanted to go on a test drive, but he did not do that. I think the Secret Service put the kibosh on that. But he was doing it all because obviously Tesla is being attacked around the country. It's really serious. It's not just bricks through windows. It's people shooting at people who are at the dealerships and all that. But in a show of support for Tesla and of course for Elon Musk, Tesla's owner, that's why he did all this and promoted it. So that got me thinking: if you were president, Derek, or if you or I were president, what American company or service would you want to promote from the backyard of the White House?
Oh, that's a really good question, and my serious answer to that would be too close to the actual original example. Could it be something like a SpaceX or a Blue Origin, or one of these places where we have a lot of pioneering in the in space exploration and travel, because I think there's a lot of really good stuff there to brag on. But since that's a little too close to the actually original, and like you said, it's disgusting that this is going on across the country. Look, I have my issues with the way a Cybertruck looks.
Yeah,
and I have not been quiet about those.
Not there yet.
But that being said, is obviously it's a business being demonized because of an individual by people who have no idea what's going on. Mm-hmm. I would have to say, though, if I had to pick one American institution or something like that, it would probably be the UFC. And again, I know that's kind of also in the Trump orbit, but hear me out. So, what we would do with the UFC is you'd have several fighters lined up, and then whenever you had a state visit, right, you'd have a state visit. I think Ireland is here today. Mm-hmm. The gentleman was actually at the Capitol yesterday, the Prime Minister of Ireland. They would have to bring over choose whatever weight class, and part of the state visit would be at least a 5-rounder, right? Mm-hmm. So they would actually have to bring over and basically put their champion in the ring against. And so obviously Ireland, well, it'd have to be somebody in a natural weight class. I mean, we could talk about catch weight things, but that's international law, so we don't need to discuss that here. But you could, Ireland comes over, they bring Conor McGregor. Well, I mean, he's seen
not
better
anymore,
days.
Yeah.
I mean,
they've got to have a new fighter since Conor McGregor.
I don't know, man.
Okay.
But, I will tell you, though, where we would have some great development in relations? You would never see the USA-Dagestani relationship be closer. And I think that would be something that would not only be...
Dagestani?
Well, you've seen the meme where it's I forget, somebody was talking about how they train fighters over there, not just for UFC but other combat sports. He was like, you take your kid, send them over Dagestan 2-3 years, forget about it. And like essentially because they actually have like these very robust Olympic training programs in Dagestan. Now, again, I'm not speaking to the quality of anything else in and around that, but they seem to be that part of the world seems to be producing, especially like around the middle and lightweight fighters, seem to be producing some really, really nasty dudes.
All right, so UFC for you. Mine is much more domestic. I was just trying to think of like what I use on a common, on a daily basis or around the house or something.
Bourbon would be too easy, though.
Yeah, I didn't go there. I thought that would be too easy. You know what I'd like to bring back or at least promote is like the good old American appliances, like a washer and a dryer that actually washed your clothes and dried your clothes, like a
joint presser with the Culligan man.
Yes, Culligan, whoever it is, like a refrigerator that actually kept your stuff cold. I mean, with all these climate BS, all of the appliances in your house are now garbage. I mean, what about mowers that actually use gas? Like instead of electric mowers, let's get back to using gas.
I just replaced my mower probably 3 weeks ago, and they had electric options out the wazoo, but you had to actually look for a decent gas mower. Now, I will say though that the mowers, the electric mowers with these multiple bays of batteries, you're not getting all that much, even like especially if it's self-propelled, you're not getting that much cut time or that much area coverage out of that.
Right.
And so I'm with you. But will you take a friendly amendment to your particular observation?
I will consider it.
We can combine our two.
Okay.
You want to bring back the appliances, their representatives. I want to do UFC, Maytag, Culligan, 5 rounds in the octagon.
I like it. I like it. So for me, that was one of the, really the beginning of summer was, that smell from pulling on the cord on the lawnmower and, getting all that exhaust in your face along with the cut grass and everything.
Cut grass is a vibe.
Yeah. I mean, that that was character building. That wasn't just like doing your chores. That was like character building. And God forbid if you actually the blade came off or something. There were no blade guards on those things back in the day. It was like you had to learn how to be a man.
I'm seeing Brian use like the push reel mower.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're not that old, dude.
Let's go. All right, that was fun. All right, okay. Shameless plug. I'm going to switch it up this week. I'm actually going to pitch from my colleague Sam, the TPPF's Liberty Leadership Council. If you are between the ages of 21 and 40, which is not Derek and I, just barely missed it. If you're the age between 21 and 40, you can sign up for our Young Professionals organization. It's called the Liberty Leadership Council. You can find out more information at texaspolicy.com. But we have chapters all over Texas. We have events this month in Lubbock, in Austin, in San Antonio, and Houston. I think we have chapters in Tyler and I'm thinking Midland.
Dallas, Fort Worth.
Yeah, Dallas, Fort Worth, Midland. We have Fort Worth's one of our most active chapters. And so, we have chapters around the state. So to check that out. If you're between ages 21 and 40, it's a great networking event. To talk to young professionals who are, most of them are not even involved in politics. They just want to be involved or at least want to be knowledgeable about what's going on in politics and policy. Most of them are business owners or they're, teachers or they're, just regular folks that are not inside the Washington or the Austin bubble. So go out and meet those folks. TexasPolicy.com. It's called the Liberty Leadership Council. It's open to anybody who wants to go check it out. Check out our events page for LLC events near you. All right, let's get to it. No guest this week, so it's just me and you, Derek, talking about news of the week. We've already mentioned it several times, but it definitely is the highlight of the week. Yesterday, Chairman Brad Buckley held the House Pub Ed Committee, chairman of the House Pub Ed Committee, held a hearing on HB3, which is the Education Savings Accounts bill. You said it was almost 21 hours of testimony. Man, where do we start? What's your reaction to everything that happened?
Well, where did we start specifically was about 7:30 in the morning when the doors opened. No, just taking a recap from the whole thing, and I probably watched, definitely more than is healthy, but I probably watched a good portion of that, then went to bed and woke up and turned it back on, and it was still on.
Yikes.
That was not hyperbole. When I woke up at 6, it was still going. And so what we saw is essentially I would say I don't want to say that this discussion is done, because obviously it's not. But if you look at the engagement and where people are engaging at, you definitely see that this discussion is over. Not as in settled and stuff like that. And obviously,
still have to vote next week. So it has to go to the floor.
But as far as introducing any new debate, it's the same, especially from the anti-school choice crowd. It was the same stale talking points that have been well rebutted for the last 3-4 months.
Mm-hmm.
And there really hasn't been anything new that have been added to there. There was some additional use of humans as props, which was pretty disgusting, but we talked about that last week.
Mm-hmm.
But we really haven't seen any qualitatively new contributions to that. And, from our side as well, because, we've got our stuff out. There's no gold, silver bullet that is, that have come across, because if you look at the other states that this is used in, the debate's relatively settled. And I think that there are certain people on that dais who refuse to believe that or characterize it in a certain way in bad faith.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how many times you point out that, I should say there was one new thing yesterday. There was one new thing, because whenever you set a bill, the LBB will generate a fiscal note for it.
Mm-hmm.
So this bill had a fiscal note where they project, it could be up to $5 billion in 5 years. It's funny how you spend something once the same amount per year, that at 5 of those ends up the same in 5 years.
Right.
Crazy how that works.
That's math.
Again, not doing math in public.
Yeah.
But that being said, it's one of the arguments that these individuals who oppose school choice, who are not fiscal hawks until they find something they disagree with, and they certainly aren't against giving welfare to millionaires and billionaires, like one particular representative thumped his chest and saying, despite voting for every single taxpayer largesse program that we've ever passed here in Texas during his time. It simply just is, they're like, oh, well, this is $5 billion. We don't, that could be what we fund our schools with. Like, do you not understand that this is subject to legislative appropriation? If they wanted to, if the 90th legislature came in and they wanted to make school choice available to one kid at $10,000 for an ESA,
right,
they could appropriate $10,000 or appropriate none at all. They could just defund the program. Not that I want to accuse a certain party of trying to defund things that are important, but they would just go ahead and do that. But they think that there's some out of control autopilot spend,
right,
and none of this works like that.
Right.
Literally none of this works like that.
Yeah,
and so that was the only new thing that I saw added.
And so I largely agree with you on the front end, is that, and our side is the same way. I mean, we're not saying anything that we haven't said for 5 years about giving parents more choice, giving more options, more control of their kids' education, and so on and so forth. And then using the various, reports and research that from around the country to demonstrate that school choice works. I do kind of want to climb into the messaging on this, and again, it's nothing's done until the ink is dry on the bill from Governor Abbott's signature. But I think it's worth evaluating kind of where the two sides are, and I think we don't really ever talk about messaging very much on despite me being the messaging guy, we don't really talk about it too much here. But I kind of want to jump into it because the ways that we develop our messaging, I mean, we go about it from a research perspective. Like, where are the people? Like, what do the people out there think about certain ideas, about certain policy issues, and we kind of understand where they're coming from. What is the perspective that they have? And then the whole purpose of messaging, right, is to connect where the people are with your policy ideas. The messaging is the part in between. That's the framing. That's the narrative.
I defer to the expert.
Right, and right, and the whole point of framing a narrative and all that is to align your policy ideas with generally what people think about how the way the world works or how it should work. I mean, that's the purpose of messaging policy. And so when you look at, just shortly, I don't have to go into a whole treatise on this, but again, our messaging is aligned with the fact that the average Texan, the vast majority of Texans, they want more choices in things. This even goes beyond education. They want more choices in things. And closely aligned with that is, if you have choices in things, then you have control over what, the quality of the thing that you ultimately choose and whether or not it suits you or doesn't suit you. And then finally, if you're making a choice on something, then and you're going from one thing to the other, you're generally in your mind, you're thinking that's a better thing. I'm going from something that doesn't work to something that does work. And that really aligns with our policy, is because that's what school choice is. School choice is giving parents more options than they have now, which is factually correct. There's nothing they can say that disproves that. Number two, it gives them agency. It gives them control over what the choice is. You have the account and you decide which school you want your child to go to. And then third, again, because you're making a choice from this to the other thing, inherently you're making a choice to improve your child's education. And because our messaging is in line with that, I think that's why generally you'll see this massive support around the state for something like school choice. And just quickly, if you look at the reason why the left's messaging doesn't work, you hit the nail on the head. Because that's what parents want. Parents want choice, they want options, they want control, and they want improvement in the education. Standing up there at the dais and complaining about political donations for 20 hours does nothing to address those concerns that parents have.
Right.
You know, saying that some guy gave a politician a bunch of money and because that politician supports school choice, you shouldn't support school choice, does not connect with anybody. Again, that messaging does not align with what people want.
Well, I'm going to ESA and kind of, you know, put on my hat from my previous life here. Is one of the, you know, we need to have Josh back on the show so he can explain OODA loops and all of that. But if you're actually talking about fighting on the ground that you currently occupy, you're losing or moving backwards, right?
Right.
And so that right there is the fundamental asymmetry of the argument, is that they're like, aha, you know, I remember that one of the wackos, I'm a Republican and I'm against vouchers folks, and I say that because they're organized in that way, you know. But hey, you know, AstroTurf would not be the business I'd promote from the presidency. That being said, one of them was the one who was leading that charge, and it definitely, like, it not only impugns your character, but it also shows that, like, you're not thinking about this holistically, because that is what you're bringing to the argument. And again, like I said, this argument has moved past the Public Education Committee. It had been moved past that since before the hearing. And they, again, but let's litigate this particular ground. And that is not how any of this works. And not only that, they were grappling with things that, to your point, that have nothing to do with the actual state of debate.
Right.
And in fact, they brought in, I can't remember the guy's name, but a professor who kind of made his bones at Little Brother University, which is what we could call Michigan State up north.
Oh, it's the one person they can claim as an academic. Literally, he's quoted in every single article.
Well, he's a go-to guy because he's the guy willing to be that resource. We'll call it generally. Yeah. But then again, I just see Michigan State and I just dismiss out of hand anything he has to say. Unfortunately, though, obviously basketball, they got our number. But you know, I happily lift up the football record. But again, it's like no matter how much you refute that, like they spent hours on him because he was assuaging the narrative that they wanted to promote from that particular hearing. Again, that we're past that already. We were past that before they gavelled in. Secondly, you also have the issue of the just the overwhelming support. Now, I have to correct you, Brian. You say this is what a lot of people want. I saw a poll the other day that said 71% of people hate this.
Yeah.
Which, of course, is hilarious. It's the one poll going the other way, and it doesn't disclose any of the methodology, but that's a whole other thing. But, hey, I guess it's good work if you can get it.
Hey, that actually brings up a really good point about what I'm saying about how to do the messaging, is that, you know, I'll tell people this, and this brings up actually the first point is that they're not using messaging that connects to the animating values that people have on this issue. That's the first one. The second one is they are using messaging that will get you to an 80% answer in a poll. Yeah. And this is the second, when I worked on campaigns, this is the second big problem that campaigns and others will make using polling, is that they will poll something that will get them an 80% answer, but it's just not that important to people, right? It's not the animating thing. So if I go out to people and I say, you know, I'll be the candidate that cuts your taxes, well, maybe that's a bad example in Texas with our property tax.
Whole other thing.
Yeah, but, you know, I'll be the candidate that protects, you know, puppy dogs and ice cream. You're going to get to 85%. People, 85 or 90% of people will say they love puppy dogs and ice cream, you know, and making Mother's Day a national holiday. You can't run on that. That's not an animating issue for people, and in terms of the values that they're bringing to understanding this issue. So if you're talking about millionaires and billionaires giving campaign contributions, okay, you can get to 80% of people who say, say, oh, we have too much, too much
Money
in
in
politics or something, right? But what does that have to do with whether or not my kid can get an education? What does that have to do with the fact that I feel lost and have no leverage and no control over my kid's education, which is 62% of Texans say that they have less, they don't have enough control over education. So again, I don't know if this is helping or hurting on the left, but because like you said, it's pretty much baked in. But using those arguments, they'll never persuade anybody to anything.
Just to cynically push back and give you that meme, first time. The issue that you brought up and the hypothetical person that you created is not representative of anyone that's in their constituency, which we've gone over time and time again, which are interested stakeholders in the system itself.
So, obviously a lot of kudos to Chairman Buckley, to the members of the committee, and even the folks I thought there were several Democrats that did they made legitimate points, and not actually, but they made legitimate points. They had legitimate concerns. I thought the chairman did a very good job at letting them, explore those issues and talking with the witnesses, particularly the first 2 hours of witnesses, because those are the ones that actually had real information to offer. But I thought so. Overall, I thought committee process was well. So kudos to everybody, not just the ones that I agree with, but everybody for going through that process and then getting to the next step, which is this is kind of in your wheelhouse now. What is the next step? When's the vote and all that?
We're at to speculate. Vote out next week. They had not voted out HB2 or HB3, the funding, or the ESA. Vote those two out. And set them to calendars and get them on the floor as soon as possible. We've talked, and again, I would love to see this on the governor's desk, with ink on it before the final gavel falls. And I think that's still a likelihood,
still a possibility. So we'll see what happens. In terms of this bill is not exactly like SB2, so that throws a little bit of a wrench into things. There will probably have to be a conference committee.
Well, yes, but they advanced HB3 as a standalone without laying it out on top of SB2, let's say.
Okay.
And so they still have in committee the Senate vehicle that had passed, which there's tactics and strategies to discuss about that, but that's people don't tune in for. You have to subscribe to the Right Idea Plus for the streaming only version.
After dark.
Yeah. Well, easy there, man. But that being said, yeah, there's reasons for that. But yeah, I think that the way with things are moving, I think it's still very, very promising.
That would be funny if there was like a Right Idea Plus where you just go like hardcore into like the legislative details and all of those.
Well, it'd probably just be like a normal, like you just put in we could put one of Jefferson's like boom mics in my office and Andrew's office or in Jerome's office, and then we just wouldn't edit the swear words and like that. I mean, Brendan Carr might come after us, but
then it becomes just basically like a reality show where we just have Steven or somebody follow you around with the camera, and then it's TPPF.
Give the
reality.
People what they want, Brian.
Yeah, I don't know. We already have enough podcasts and things that Jefferson needs to edit. All right, cool. All right, well, obviously we're very happy with the way things turned out yesterday. I thought everybody did a great job. So we'll move on to the next step, which means we'll move on to the next issue, which is also education related. The Department of Education vacates, was it 1,100 jobs? I guess there's new details that are coming out. The U.S. Department of Education started sweeping layoffs beginning Tuesday evening. As President Donald Trump has proposed eliminating the agency altogether. The department is expected to cut about 50% of its workforce, and notices start going out Tuesday evening. The department employs around 4,400 workers. This was a campaign promise.
Yeah. Well, no, and that's the funny thing, because everyone's like, "Oh my God, how dare he?" And it's like, don't get me wrong. I tend to subscribe to the Scalia philosophy that a campaign promise is the least binding form of human commitment. But that being said, he literally ran on this, and people in the past, in the Republican side and on the right, have literally ran on this. And so, I don't want to name names or out anybody here in this room, but out of the three people that we have sitting around here, two of which are older than the Department of Education. That is something that I think that we forget to take. Everyone think that like this is this hallowed, time-tested institution in American politics, when it's not. It literally came from within the lifetimes of many just middle-aged people.
Or just that if there's some issue that's important to people or that, has some nexus with government, there should be a department of that thing.
Exactly. Well, I think that's the more proximate cause. But I mean, look at it's like the same thing with OSHA. People say, like, look at after OSHA was founded, you basically have this long decline of industrial action, ergo OSHA successful. Then and John Stossel is like famous for doing this, saying, and here's what the industrial accidents looked like before OSHA. And it was the same exact trend. The only thing was a series break where OSHA came into being, and it didn't make it drop off steeper, but it just kind of kept going down the same line. And so that leads the question is, well, what kind of outcomes do we get from the Department of Education? We obviously now have federal involvement in education, which has been an absolute disaster in terms of Title IX and things like that.
The higher ed situation, with
the higher ed
exploding
situation,
costs of higher ed.
To say nothing of like the campus J boards, the Dear Colleague letters, all that other stuff, but those are all whole other things. But but now we actually have, when it comes to the actual outcomes that we show in education, K-12, those things have been declining. Those now granted, before that, we didn't necessarily have a harmonized metric for that. But at least what we can say is that while we had federal involvement, and not even just federal involvement, but unorganized federal involvement, what is the purpose of the Department of Education?
Yeah.
If you ask 10 people on the street, you get 12 different answers.
Right.
While we had the Federal Department of Education, you can say, unqualified, that performance in the schools have worsened. I'll be fully open to, you had a COVID issue. Yeah, that explains the last 5 years at most. Well, how do you explain the decline before that?
Right.
And again, it's these declines existed and were captured within the existence of the Department of Education. So why are we spending all this money on a department that's getting involved in so many areas outside the core of the education function? Look, nobody's, despite all the lies that we heard yesterday, nobody's trying to get rid of public education. Though I will say, not to rewind issues, the fact that we had a member actually quoting Milton Friedman, you know what? I don't, even if for nefarious purposes, at least you read some Milton Friedman, right?
Yeah, right.
But all that to say is nobody's trying to get rid of public education. However, we're spending a lot of money on an entire institution that corrupts it.
Yeah.
So what is it that we're going to do? This is the Department of Education is one of the ones. Look, we can talk about the Department of Justice, and obviously with the policy formation that folks were engaging in, before Trump came into office. There were debates about what are we going to do about the FBI, what are we going to do about Department of Justice, and there are definitely folks who take the Gordian knot approach to that. Mm-hmm. This is, and I'm an incrementalist conservative. I do not take that approach. Department of Education, I am more than willing to say, give me that sword and let me take a baseball swing, because that is we have no positive results that have been proven. We have a bunch of meddling and we have a bunch of money being spent. I say get rid of it.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about this during the Project 2020 and 2025 whenever they were attacking. This was one of the major, of all the things, this is kind of funny because they made this laundry list of awful things that Project 2025 was supposedly doing. And of the 15 things, we polled all of them. The only one that was underwater was getting rid of the Department of Education. Everything else that Project 2025 stood for, the American people loved. So this is one of those things that, it just sounds, like the average person hears, oh, what are we getting rid of education for? Does that mean, like I said, this is kind of a proxy for should we be, promoting education or not, even though the Department of Education doesn't really do that. But we went through this at the time because we had to defend it a lot, when I was working, as a coalition partner for Project 2025. We had to defend this one a lot. And the criticism, we would just ask people just the question that you asked, which is, 4,400 people, and it has this, whatever the crazy budget is, 20 billion, 30 billion, or whatever it is, what do they actually do? And they would, come up with 2 or 3 legitimate things like Pell Grants, or they would come up with, protections for special ed kids and things like that. But it was really, it was not necessarily small ball, but it was just a few things. And we're asking why does that have to have its own department? I mean, that's the big question. It's why can't these functions or even these programs be housed in some other department or be housed just under the White House in general, under the domestic policy advisor or something? And that would go a long way in terms of making those programs actually functional and efficient, and then, of course, saving a ton of money.
Well, the best part I like about that one was the one with they were talking about civil rights and education, and people were like, "Oh, well, who's going to prosecute, violations of civil rights and education?" Like, who? If only we had a department in the federal bureaucracy that sought justice.
Yeah.
Where
do the prosecutors work? Where do the prosecutors?
Well, yeah, the Office of the Prosecutor's Department. We'll have to make it new. But no, it's so ridiculous.
Right.
And it's mission creep. And not only that, but then obviously when it talks to any sort of, public choice theory stuff, obviously we talk about institutional capture. And obviously the lunatics have started running that particular asylum. If you see by any sort of administrative and rulemaking guidance that comes out from there, there's really not much more to add to that.
So a couple things I want to hit. We have a big stack, as they say, over at our friends Carla and Willie to get through. There's a lot of news of the week. I definitely wanted to hit our good friend, Texas Comptroller Glenn Hegar.
We can say friend of the pod.
Friend of the pod, Glenn Hegar, who was on about 6 weeks back with us. If he comes back on the pod, he will not be the Texas Comptroller, at least after June. He will be the next chancellor at the University of Texas A&M
We
System.
probably wouldn't let you interview him, though, if he's going to A&M.
Proud Aggie. I understand he is. Because it'll just be about that game we had last year. But he'll be overseeing the whole system, of course, as chancellor, overseeing 11 universities that educate more than 150,000 students throughout Texas, 8 state agencies. Let's see. The Board of Regents selected Hegar to succeed John Sharp, who has held the position since 2011. So anyway, not to add controversy to it, but I mean, part of this was that there was a lot of, at least the discussion, not controversy, but part of the debate was that Texas A&M, you would think, would be a more conservative body, and that in some examples had essentially kind of lost its way on some of this woke nonsense. There was the fracas over the hiring of to be their next university president. I forget her name, McKay or something like that. She's actually on Sherry Sylvester's podcast.
There's a shameless plug.
But she was a very woke a person when she was at the University of Texas, and so it was very head scratching that she would be the next president over there at A&M. So maybe this is because we know that Glenn Hegar is a strong conservative, maybe this is kind of a nod in that direction to say, yeah, we've kind of lost our way with letting the sort of inmates run the asylum, and we're going to get some conservative leadership back over here.
Well, let me say on that, because I definitely think that, first of all, I mean, obviously, outstanding choice by the A&M administration picking him to come in, the Regents, because he is, like you said, conservative, and obviously friend of the show, like we said. But that being said, he's also like an actually fairly competent administrator, and I think that that's something that has been lost on a lot of these presidential searches. Now Texas is going to have to get involved in their own presidential search.
Well, that's if he has a lot of success, we'll do it just like we did the baseball team and steal their coach. So.
But then it makes a whole carousel. You follow enough football to know.
So if you do a good job, Glenn, we'll money whip you at Texas, and you can come on over.
Yeah, it all comes from the same fund, man. So
get to see him gladly. Sure,
yeah,
why not?
But anyway, no. But that's great, because I think that if we have illustrated anything on this show when we talk about higher ed, whether it's discussions that we had about the 15% the week ago, higher ed as an extant model is done. Like, it's like the way we conceive higher ed today is not going. Is probably not going to be the same way in the state when we get through this legislative session, let alone 5, 10, 15 years from now, right? So, for our actual flagship institutions, and I'm not saying, look, I'm easy UT. I'm not saying that A&M's a flagship, but I'm saying for a staple institution of the state, you are going to need to have dynamic, smart, and basically, I don't want to say experimental, but leadership that's willing to make tough calls, engage in some novel approaches, and fundamentally get past this idea of where we basically have these faculty sinecures, and those are the inmates running the asylum, not to use that analogy again. But yeah, these universities exist as completely, I don't want to say unregulated, but ones that try to represent themselves as ungovernable, and they just have their hand out to the state and expect that hand to come back with money in it. And I think that Glenn Hegar realizes, especially when dealing with the legislature, when dealing with other agencies within the state, is that is not a safe expectation in 2025.
Especially at UT, where we thought we had kind of turned a corner with Jay Hartzell, because you saw...
And to be fair, you had.
And we had, because not only was he pushing back on the faculty on some things, but there was also the creation of the Civitas Institute, which is a more... I mean, it wasn't intended to be considered conservative, but is a more...
Classical education,
which was a pushback against the progressive DEI-driven stuff. But also, when we saw the protests on South Campus, or sorry, was it South Mall? Right before graduation last year, and they did the right thing. They said you can't camp here, and they sent in the authorities, and they removed the people trying to camp. And so that's just not something that at a traditionally liberal, far left university that UT had become after a while, that we thought we'd ever see. But we did get that strong leadership, and so it's kind of we're now okay. Well, we thought we turned a corner. Are we going to regress?
Well, I don't think you're going to regress, and credit for Hartzell for making the right calls in a really tough spot. I mean, I say a tough spot. I mean, obviously we have our preferences, but he has a lot more bosses than we do that he has to respond to, including one main boss who made it clear that wasn't going to fly. But contrast that with the opposite. Had he not, we would be having these discussions where the University of Texas is going to lose all federal funds like Columbia just did.
Right.
And it's going to be one of those things where it's like that's the alternative timeline in Doctor Strange.
Shifting gears a little bit, will Texas supplant Delaware as the new corporate headquarters hub? Everybody knows Delaware's got, or at least they've all know that, if you want to have a major corporation in America, you go and incorporate out of Delaware because they've got the right tax laws there that help you keep more of your own money.
That was the idea.
But there are plans. Texas lawmakers are looking to change that, Derek.
Yeah, so the big thing to keep in mind is
Tell us a little bit about the bill and Brian Hughes' bill and all that.
Oh, well, I would say that's a whole that's a whole other thing with that particular bill, but general place setting. So you're right. Delaware had a regulatory and judicial environment that up until recent times offered that for, when it comes to ease of incorporation, board structure, governance, all that stuff. It was easy to do that in Delaware. That was always what they saw. Because what the hell else Delaware got, right? They have Rehoboth Beach, or is that in Delaware? Or
Rehoboth, yeah.
Yeah, so they have a beach
Bethany
and a good
Beach?
tax structure, or had a good tax structure. And then, of course, we always saw it happen with Elon's thing. And obviously, $56 billion, that's eye-popping. But that's also what the board of directors of that particular corporation had already approved. And you're not able to nullify corporate contract based on vibes, or we just have no rule of law.
So do they know? Is the implication that they nullified because it was Elon Musk's $56 billion shareholder approved pay package? They vetoed that. The state vetoed that.
Yeah, and obviously it's much more legally nuanced, but essentially they're like, "Whoa, that's a lot of money." Yeah, okay, and it's like, "Yeah, you can't do that. That's a lot of money." And it's like, "Yeah, but
that's it.
Yeah, but what we agreed, as beneficiaries and shareholders and stakeholders of the company." No, we agreed. It's a lot. Yeah, we agree it's a lot of money, but we've also made a lot of money.
Yeah.
So,
and this guy's probably the reason why.
Yeah.
Let's keep going.
And so they said, so the state put the kibosh on that. And when you don't have consistent rule of law, I mean, this is why nobody's incorporating in Dagestan until we get the trade partnership.
Man, that's two mentions of Dagestan.
I have to come out. I'm actually on the payroll of I'm on the Dagestan payroll.
Grifter.
Yeah, no, it's what do you call it? I'm a representative of visitdagestan.com. Yeah, so trying to just drop it as many times as I can. Long story short, though, Chairman Hughes' bill is really looking to, I would say, kind of create that similar structure of that promise that Delaware had originally. And because everyone thinks like, oh, Delaware, it's like a state the size of a postage stamp to scale. What them or Rhode Island, they can't do much. It's like, well, you can have physical industry in other states, but if you're incorporated there, they're taking a cut of those taxes there in Delaware. It was the same thing. Their old model, before Hong Kong was given back to the Chinese, mimicked Hong Kong a lot. And there was obviously, and Singapore even, there was obviously a lot of good laissez-faire policy there that allowed these businesses to flourish. But if they want to put their boots on the neck of those businesses are going to come somewhere else. Chairman Hughes is trying to, again, roll out the red carpet for them to come to Texas.
And other similarities, everyone knows that the best dim sum is in Delaware. So
you can't just leave it at that, man. You got to
just kidding. I have no idea what the dim sum is.
I was about to say we might get was in Delaware. Best dim sum coming to Plano.
All right. Well, we're getting into our 10-minute drill because I know we have a hard stop here in a couple minutes. So let's get to our survey says. This is one of my favorite parts because we get to talk about polling. Woo! And everybody hates polling right now because all the polling is showing that conservatives are right. Anyway, but this is not about public policy polling. I thought this was really interesting. 22% of Texans now say that they get all of their political or mostly get their political news from social media, which is more than cable, more than local news, and more than news websites. Now, I bring this up because even with the explosion of the internet and the explosion of social media over the last couple of decades, it has always been local news. And local news has always still been king. You know, you watch Wheel of Fortune, you watch Jeopardy, then you watch your local news, and that has always been the number one place that most adults will say that they get their political and information from. But a new poll statewide here in Texas from UT Tyler now says that the number one is social media. I don't even know if that's a good or bad thing considering what social media is like these days.
Right. I would argue probably uncomfortable.
Not great.
Yeah, because, I mean, obviously, and it's not just because... You know, we could have Dunmoyer on here talk about how the algorithms work or anything like that to say how it becomes this self-reinforcing pursuit. But the bigger issue is social media is, and I'm not anti-social media by any means, but if you're the kind of person who gets political news or something that has a degree of nuance from social media, you're probably existing within a fairly narrow ideological ecosystem of that stream. Now, I can speak for yourself and I can speak for me and say we don't have that problem. And I'm not saying that we're immune to any of these human tendencies to seek confirmation bias or anything like that. What I can say is that we need to follow a very broad stream of accounts and channels and whatnot, because if we didn't, then we would get blindsided by things that are happening or what the left is saying about X, Y, or Z.
But you mentioned a really good point about, about the narrow interests and only getting a certain set of information. That actually was a major criticism for the last decade or so of the rise of cable news, and that all conservatives were all going and getting their news from Fox News. All the left was going to MSNBC and CNN to get their news, and how that that polarization, because of course conservatives want to see a certain point of view and liberals want to see a certain point of view, that it just sort of reinforced all of that and increased the polarization. But at least those outlets, to the extent that we can even say this without giggling, they had some journalistic standards. They had journalistic standards on what was news and what was not. There was a lot of commentary, and what they chose to pick versus what they chose not to cover obviously has impact on that. But generally, you could trust that you were getting information that was at least had a kernel of truth. Yeah. Social media is a cesspool. I mean, it really can be a cesspool at times. And to your point about the algorithms, is that that's the point of the algorithm, is to reinforce if you're interested in a certain subject or even a point of view. Hey,
Brian, I hear you like a cesspool. Have some more cesspool.
It'll feed. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to get weird, Google searches from my phone now because I said the word cesspool. But it's true. I mean, I engage a lot with, say the people out there who are anti-school choice. I engage with them a lot to do fact checks and debunk some of the things that they're saying. Well, honestly, probably 70% of my feed right now is nothing but, people who are complaining about school choice, even though I know that the vast majority of Texans support it. So my point is, like,
wait, hold on. Is your assertion that social media is not real life?
It's algorithmic life. I don't know, but it's not even just simply polarization anymore. But but there's no journalistic integrity on social media because and one of the great things about it is that people can say whatever they want. I love the First Amendment, and I love what Elon's done with X and all that. But I'm just curious about what this means for the next 3 or 4 years if this kind of trend happens, where more and more people now, a plurality of people, are getting most of their political news from a place like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram.
Well, the problem there isn't the social media per se, nor the ability or nor the preference for getting information from there. I'm actually absolving social media on this because the problem is actually being a good consumer, a good critical thinker, a good consumer of information, or a good critical thinker. That's the problem that we have. But we've had that. I mean, that problem's been on the rise since long before, people were posting, minion memes on Facebook talking about the presidential candidates. So the problem is I don't want to say people are lazy, but people are lazy, and the advantage of social media, specifically with an algorithmically curated timeline, is that it gives people it gives them that dopamine hit quickly. They don't have to develop it. And so essentially, again, if that particular reinforcement process over and over and over, you get down into this very narrow sliver. In fact, it was I can't remember what it was, but remember Lonely Island, right, from Saturday Night Live?
Sure, yeah.
They have a new one nowadays. I think it's called Please Don't Destroy. It's got a sketch comedy group of writers or whatever it is. But they had one where the entire premise of this skit was, show us your Explore page on Instagram. And the guys were like, we're not playing that game. No, and they're like, oh, wait, what's it going to show? And it just turned out to be just bizarre stuff.
Yeah.
But that's kind of, that's a long way of saying that really kind of shows this is you will get trapped in that cul-de-sac. Yeah. And if you're not actually actively curating things outside of it.
Mine Explorer is just trying to sell me golf, enhanced,
those weird things that don't work.
Yeah, the golf self-help things. I'm just
if you raise your head when you drive, it hits you in the face or something.
That's all it is on my Explore page on Instagram. All right, well, I'm just curious. We'll keep an eye on that because I do think it will have. I mean, if this persists, and this is where most people. And again, it's only 22%, but it is a plurality, and it's more than cable and it's more than local news. And so we'll see. We'll keep an eye on these trends and how they might flow. All right, we're gonna have to skip to our last segment because we have a pretty hard stop here coming up. So what to watch for? What's next? I'll let you go first.
Well, I think the big thing that's next, obviously we talked about earlier, is what the timeline is for the school choice bills leaving committee. And then in calendars, obviously, there's going to be, some shenanigans in calendars, people trying to throw the brakes on that. But, like I said, it's if it's the will of the body, and this bill has however many co-authors and, probably some that we've remained to see. Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel pretty good about it, but it's going to be interesting to see where people try to disrupt the process. Even
do they have a process like they do in Congress of expediting that? Like if a certain number of members sign a petition, we have a discharge position. Yeah, we have.
There are similar things.
We in Congress have.
There are similar things. Similarly, you can satisfy. Similarly, you could satisfy the committee requirement with the committee of the whole, where an entire body would be the committee. Yeah. And so it would just be more votes. But that being said, there are processes in there. They're very rare. They're a bit of a lift. But that being said, the time being what it is, the time being when it is, Bill's still in good shape.
Yeah.
In good shape.
All right, for me, it would be, we haven't talked a lot about this. We had Jason Isaac on a couple weeks ago, but really it's on energy policy. I mean, the rumor is what are we doing on energy policy? And energy policy is probably one of the top three things that people care about, because if the lights don't come on and, the heat doesn't work and the air conditioning doesn't work here pretty soon, people are going to get upset. And we've done some polling, and we know that despite all of the reforms that have happened over the last couple of sessions, people are still a little bit uneasy, about split, 50-50 about whether or not they think the grid has had the effective number of reforms. And it doesn't feel like there's a real strong push for a particular agenda. That might be fatigue, exactly because we've done monumental reforms over the last couple of sessions. There might be a little fatigue on that, and so maybe there's like a shift of focus here, maybe on nuclear. Nuclear seems to be getting people excited about what the future of that is, but then also just being able to make sure that the grid is safe for this explosion in like data centers, and you hear about crypto and all of that, sucking energy off the grid. And so maybe there's some, not minor and not marginal things. Those are all be fairly significant. Certainly expansion of nuclear would be significant, but it doesn't feel like, the two sides are going to come together, the House and the Senate, to do a third monumental grid fix or something.
Well, I mean, look, if we're contractually obligated to mention school choices every 10 minutes, one of the things we also did, I think, Jason actually probably banked us up some episodes in advance, but we need to mention firming. And so that's one of the things that I think is interest on. I mean, we've seen Senator Sparks with bills in that regard. The thing is, I think you hit the nail right on the head with the fatigue. And it's not even fatigue like, look, we already did this and the generators are coming in and kicking down my door and making my life a living hell. It's more just, we've done two big things. Shouldn't we see how it plays out? Unfortunately,
tinkering. It's like, I think it was the word that I heard someone use. More tinkering.
And that's the issue, though. It's like, but again, if you don't get that firming element, did you really do anything? Mm-hmm. And so that, I think, is a good selection.
All right. That's a good place to wrap. What to watch for. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And as we like to say at the end of every show, in the immortal words of our good friend Sam Houston, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, I went to school with him.